This isn't a typical internal audit output. And for a lot of organisations, this will be done by someone else, whether it be your strategy department, whether it be your risk department. But as I say, I've got at least one client where they asked internal audit to do it, and I actually think internal audit can bring a great lens to this. Even if internal audit's not leading this body of work, I think that internal audit should be looking to contribute to it. So if the strategy people are doing it, or the risk people, or whoever, because you'd imagine someone will be, then trying to feed into that, I think, is valuable, because we bring a controls lens, which others may not bring. And we bring a lens that can see the whole organisation, because as internal audit, we have access across the whole organisation. There are a number of ways you can deliver this. It could be a research document. I mean, a lot of the material that I provided earlier has been gleaned from research across the marketplace. So it can be just a research document, or it could be an issues paper that tailors that research to our organisation. The other way I've seen it done is to do a facilitated executive workshop, to workshop what those impacts are, both immediate term and longer term. Really, as I say, that will depend on whether there's someone else doing that in your business. Next slide. So as I say, this is the basically sort of the traditional approach to a lessons learned. This is what we did in our immediate response to COVID-19, sorry. What worked and what didn't. Now, the reason, in many respects, you'd think, well, why are we going to do that? Everyone's suggested this is a once in 100-year pandemic, and that may be true, but the World Health Organization has been emphatic that there will be future waves of COVID-19, and that pandemics will become more regular in the future. And so there's clearly value in looking back and learning what we went through. I think it's fair to say no organisation had the perfect response, because no one had lived through anything like this before. So identifying those lessons learned, I think, is a valuable piece of work. And it's as I say, it's a typical lessons learned project. It follows that lessons learned circle I described earlier, and it can be powerful. Clearly, though, and if we went back to that circle, being in an organisation that's willing to learn from its lessons and implement change as a result of what's identified is key to the value from that body of work. Next slide. And the last one, that enhance organisational resilience. So I might just, organisational resilience is a term that's getting used more and more in the sort of marketplace. And I've put in on this slide a definition of it, because I think that can help, particularly if you're talking to your executives about doing something like this. So organisational resilience is the ability of an organisation to anticipate, prepare for, respond, and adapt to an incremental change and sudden disruptions in order to survive and prosper. And I think a lot of what we talked about in the first half of this showed the importance of surviving and prospering in what is clearly a sudden disruption in the context of a pandemic. But it's very forward-looking. So it's not looking at how we responded, or it may touch on that, but it's seeking to be more forward-looking. What do we change in terms of our, to go back to those sort of impacts that we discussed at the beginning, what needs to change in the context of our strategy, our customers, our workforce, our operations, our finance, and our technology, so those 6 domains we talked about at the beginning, to be able to survive and prosper in environments like we're in. It brings all of the kind of components that we've talked about together. That normative model can be equally helpful in looking at organisational resilience as it can be just assessing the previous response approach. Next slide. Okay. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of tips and then we'll wrap up for some questions. So these are my kind of quick tips, if you like, for if you're going to do a pandemic lessons learned. Firstly, you have to ensure it's got leadership sponsorship. It's got leadership sponsorship from the very top of the organisation, the CEO or the COO. If it doesn't, if it's something that internal audit is doing without that, it almost certainly won't be successful. So ensure it's got sponsorship from the very top of the organisation. Bring in expertise as required to ensure capability and credibility. If this is work that's going to the board or going to the executive committee, and you need some strategic nous or some better understanding of operations, then bring that in some way, shape or form to ensure that you've got the right, you've come up with the right advice and counsel. Be clear on the value you're proposing to add. So if you are going to do this, internal audit is there to add value. Be clear on what that value is. You'll probably need it in terms of the sales pitch of proposing this work to the executive. And if you're not clear on that value, it's hard to see why executive would support audit doing it. But be clear on what it is, and that can then end up being a bit of a guiding light for the lessons learned process as you continue to head towards whatever that value you're proposing to add. Be practical. So, this has been hammered home to me by a client, not a current client. Theoretical constructs are not seen as helpful. So any recommendations or advice that you've got that come out of a lessons learned need to be practical. Be sympathetic and balanced. So organisations have been through hell, pardon the term, over the last 4 months. If we write a lessons learned exercise that just beats them up about stuff they did wrong, it will not be received well. And as internal auditors, we know that generally it's just more pronounced now. So be sympathetic, be balanced. Most organisations have done some good stuff through the COVID-19. So ensure that in any lessons you are sympathetic and balanced. Focus as much as on positioning the organisation for the future as commenting on the past. I think that's where the greater value comes. So think about how you position what you find and the advice you give out of this process. And then finally, in conduct and reporting, be conscious of the operating environment. So as I say, I've done my piece of work in the middle of the response. So it started in beginning of May. And so Australia was coming off its peaks, but it was still suffering from a lot of cases. I'm glad I did it then and not now. As we enter our second wave, if I was still merrily walking around the organisation identifying lessons learned and everyone is still trying to cope with a new second wave, I would say that wouldn't be seen as helpful. So just be conscious of the operating environment as you conduct it and as you report anything out of this. Next slide. So a call to action. There is some real value audit can provide, and there have been examples in the marketplace, not just the piece of work I've done, where audit has been seen as being really powerfully valuable to the CEO and to the board. Our organisations we work for are a bit exhausted, but they still are hungry for value. They're still hungry for advice as the pandemic drags on. We may need to pitch it, we may need to sell it, but I think it's probably the best value as auditors we can provide our organisations right now. So I would be encouraging you, have the conversation, seek to sort of position to contribute to what are the lessons learned, how can we be more resilient, and I think you'll find it to be a really rewarding exercise both for you and for your businesses. So that's the end of the prepared comments. Next slide, and we'll open it up again for questions and answers.
Mark, should we put the poll questions first?
To be honest, given we've only got 15 minutes left, I think the poll questions would have worked better in the middle of the session. Okay. I'm not sure they necessarily work real well now. So no, I don't think so.
Okay, so we can actually come to the questions and answer session. Pak Haris Setianto, our president of IIA Indonesia, has 3 questions. Feel free, Pak Haris.
Okay. Thank you, Mark, thank you very much for your time availability to give our members your insight, very wide, very broad, and very useful and very timely and well presented. Thank you, Mark, for your time. And actually, I have homework with you about the public sector forum. I hope we can still organize sometimes in this years.
That would be good.
Virtual, virtual or in person. We will talk about later. And I would like just to ask for confirmation. First of all, regarding the the role of us during this time of crisis, there is a view that the crisis time is actually market moment. A moment that we should enter the market because the prices are at the lowest level of price. And also in our case, it will be easy to get buy-in. In time of crisis, it will be easy for us as internal auditor to get buy-in from the stakeholders, because I think we will be better. And also in that regard, so there is a view that we should, what we do in this time of crisis will be a reflection of what will be our face in the next 10, 20 years time. If we do away from the business, then in the 20 years time, we will be forgotten by the business. But if we involve and get consulting, so our, I would like confirmation about your consulting or more involved to the deploy to the business as your point. And then relate to this point is regarding the agility. How far we should be agile, how radical that we should change our risk assessment, because like Phil Tarling and others people says that this is the time, perfect time to tear off our audit plan, to throw away our audit plan, and then forget the audit plan and then get involved with the business to in response and recovery team. So and more on consulting as your point. So please give us your view regarding this. To us, it's very radical point that we have to tear off our plan and then change to our business. Yep. And my second question is on the advice to internal controls, Mark, because in this time of crisis, there are many procedures are being produced in short time, and many control are being changed, and many control are bypassed because of necessity. Even our Ministry of Finance also asked our government auditor to help her, because she knows that many regulation actually produced instantly in few days time because the need. And also many budget, state budget and local budget are restructured in also very short time, and also big involvement. We have 677 trillion of our COVID program rupiah, which is probably about I think it's about $100 in US. So my question is, how should we involve in this advice on internal control, especially by capitalizing that, because we are source of objectivity, because we are not involved in the business, so our information will be more objective than others. And then because we are distant from the business, probably will be a source of insight because we see many areas of the business from the bird's eye view. So we will be good source of insights probably if we're doing it properly. And because we are distant from the business, probably we will be also a good resource for that area. So my question is, can you explore more role of us in advising internal control and basically by capitalizing our position? Thank you, Mark.
Okay. Wow, that covered a fair bit of territory, so bear with me. So firstly, the concept of being in the business. So I'll touch on that just very quickly. So a lot of organisations in Australia, anyway, had such a material change in what they had to do that they asked for audit functions to actually start doing first line work. So I've got a client whose whole audit team went into a call center and started just being on the phones. I've got another that the client that I at the moment that I talked about, where auditors were in the first line processing claims, and the view was that's the most important thing to be done in the business. It was all hands on deck. The chief operating officer was processing claims as well. So. In a COVID environment, survival is more important than the niceties of independence and objectivity, and I think that's okay. I would suggest before you respond in that way, you have a chat to your audit committee chair. Most audit committee chairs will be sympathetic because their jobs are on the line as well, but have that conversation. It would be unfortunate for it to come as a surprise to the audit committee chair at the next audit committee meeting that your audit team were in the business. So I'd put that as a kind of a statement around the in the business piece. Interestingly, and it's linked to the last part of your question, if your auditors are doing that, they're unable to provide the advice on controls and changed processes because they're doing first line stuff. And so ideally, you may want to try and do both, but I'll come back. Your last statement was, I think, very profound, and I absolutely agree with. So second, tearing up the audit plan. So I got to watch Phil's presentation from a couple of months ago. So I heard him say that, and I absolutely agree. Again, you don't do it unilaterally. You have a conversation with your audit committee chair. You have a conversation with the chief executive to go, this is what I'm doing, and this is why I'm doing it, because these audits won't add value, so I'm not going to persist with them. And that's usually a pretty easy conversation to have because everyone can see that the world's changed. But I absolutely agree with Phil. Your old audit program is not fit for purpose. You should not follow it. Now, you don't just rip it up and have nothing left to do. There's going to be a need to sort of say, well, I'm not going to do this, but I am going to do these things. And there needs to be some basis for what you're going to suggest, which is either a new risk assessment, your view on risk, and therefore what audit coverage they think is valuable, or, and this is where we now link back to your last comment, or to take on that advisory role for the processes that are changing. And that's probably the best thing to do. But I will come back to that. What I've seen a number of audit functions do over the pandemic is basically direct themselves to high volume or high risk processes and do live testing. So if the organisation I work with, which gives money out to people that need it, the social services money, those transactions increased tenfold. And so what the audit team did, or some of them, was to basically, as transactions are occurring, using data analysis techniques, identify that key controls, not every control, just key controls were actually working. And it's not focused on strategic things. It's not focused on performance improvement. It's pure control effectiveness on those transactions that either have changed or have gone up in volume. And I think that's a valuable use of time. But the other use of time is that advisor piece to what you were saying before. And I think that's where audit functions that can do both the traditional audit, but also the advisory and consulting come into their own. And that's where, in my experience, for all of my clients, since I was a chief auditor, that's where I've been able to add my most value. So and I know this for a fact, so for General Motors that changed their process from building cars to building ventilators, audit was part of that. So audit was part of how are you making that change? Because change management is a process and it's being done quickly to ensure that the right controls are in place, because General Motors will not be thanked if those ventilators don't work. So audit was in sort of looking at the change management, looking at the quality management to ensure that what was being changed, advising along the way to ensure that to advise that those changes were being done effectively. And it was a pure advisory role. Now that didn't mean that audit was taking responsibility for the changes. Yeah. It was just advice. So we still manage our objectivity and independence, but we add value where it counts. Organizations' internal audit functions that have struggled with that are those where they haven't never really done an advisory role before. So if there are audit functions who have forever only ever done traditional auditing, it's hard to convince management that now's the time to sort of to allow us to do something a bit different. I still think you should try and should have that conversation. But organizations where audit has been seen as a trusted advisor for a long period of time have been able to get in to do that role much more readily. And that's all of those are just part of the agility we need. I firmly believe, and I've been saying for years now, the concept of a one-year audit program, no longer relevant. Because by the time the year ends, the world is different to what it was at the beginning. So I'm not seeing organizations do full year audit plans. People are being far more agile, and that doesn't detract from the disciplined approach. We just need to be agile in a disciplined way, and there's plenty of examples of that in the marketplace.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions?
There are several questions. Maybe from the participants are willing to ask directly to Mark, like similar to Pak Hari Setianto, raise it directly.
Don't be shy.
Because somehow my laptop, I can only get into one question, but previously there are several other questions. I cannot move back to the chat. Ibu Dewi Barliana, perhaps? Ibu, Ibu. Please go ahead, Bu. Jangan malu, Bu. Mark is saying, don't be shy.
I'm friendly.
Silahkan, Ibu. Itu masih di mute ya, Pak. The organizers, maybe if possible, to unmute the participants.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bu Dewi, Bu Diana as well.
Iya, ini.
Bu Dewi, Bu Diana, Pak Ahwan, please unmute.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe semuanya di unmute, Pak Nur, Pak Eko.
Oke.
Aku baca aja kan?
Iya, silakan Ibu.
Mr. Mark.
Hello.
I'd like to see you.
Good to see you as well.
How to manage the understanding and encourage ourselves to speak up about the vulnerability and sharing the feeling of uncomfortableness about the pandemic to our surrounding. I want to about your opinion.
So So I think what I heard is my opinion on auditors having the courage to be able to discuss and describe the vulnerabilities that come from our surroundings. Is that correct? So I absolutely agree. I think we should be doing that both as auditors and advisors to our business, as colleagues in our workplace, and as and as members of our society. I firmly believe that that is an important part of what audit needs to do as part of our frank and fearless advice to our organisations and to our colleagues. In different cultures, that can be difficult. I think in Australia, historically, we weren't very good at that. I think we're getting better. I don't have a sense for Indonesia and whether Indonesia is culturally that's challenging, but I would strongly, but I think globally there is, and COVID-19 has brought this on or accelerated this. Globally, there is a far greater willingness and need to express what our feelings are and discuss what our vulnerabilities are, because they are, and as auditors, that's important because they affect our organisation's success. So I firmly agree with you that that is an important role for us all to play.
Okay.
Different culture ya, different culture.
Ya. Ibu Diana itu, Bu.
Ibu Diana, silahkan, Bu. Ibu Diana, silahkan, Bu. Somehow I have some limitations. I cannot see, the previous chat that have been already there. So yeah, okay. Ibu Diana.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Okay, Mark, I would like to ask about the previous slide where you mentioned the roles of internal auditors, one of which is capturing crisis response. Could you please elaborate more on this role, such as what are the objectives so that we as internal auditors know what we want to achieve in this capturing crisis response? Also, based on your experience and knowledge, maybe what are the main challenges so we can anticipate in conducting the capturing crisis response? And also maybe you could give us some examples, some key points that we internal auditors should capture about the crisis responses. Thank you very much, Mark.
No worries. The other slide that will help in answering this question.
Yep.
So can we go back to the slide deck? Go back. Keep going. One more. Keep going. One more. Stop there. No, that's the one. Okay, so capturing crisis response. So what some internal auditors have, so really what it is documenting what the organisational response is, but doing it real time. So I can think of two significant audit functions or audit functions of two significant organisations who were tasked by their CEO to create the structures that allowed for documentation in a single place or way of key parts of how the organisation responded. So key decisions, key changes, key strategic changes, key system implementations or changes. And so the way one of them did that was to create a connection to every part of the business, to identify a list of the sort of information that's required, the way that's being sought, and then have the business basically copy the auditor in around nature of those changes and why they were being done, and what was the authority for the changes. So that can relate to the HR response. So what did the organisation do to manage manage the safety of people, the non-medical responses, the working from home, the leave arrangement changes, things like that. It can go to the organisational responses in terms of decisions to go from building cars to building ventilators, to invest more in certain parts of the business, to go from being a restaurant to being a takeaway venue, how supply chains were being responded to, and doing that in real time. So that's what I meant by capture the response. It's not a common thing. So it's not a common thing for audit to do, but I have, and certainly not to do it real time. But the piece of work that I've recently done, that I started in beginning May, in effect did it, but not real time. So at the beginning of May, the CEO said to me, I know that I've got 30,000 staff around the country and they've all done stuff in response to the pandemic. I want you to create in one cogent way what were the components of that response. And so I built the normative model that I described earlier, and then I used that as a framework to collect across all of the organisation, what did the organisation do over the 2 months that preceded that in terms of responding to the pandemic. In an ideal world, it'd probably be the business continuity people or the pandemic, if there's a pandemic committee or team, it should be them doing that. But what I guess I've found is that in the organisations I've been working with and colleagues in other organisations, no one's been doing that. And so it's a way that internal audit has in some organisations sought to add value. Hopefully that helps a bit.
Okay, maybe with the limitation of time, maybe we should end our session. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mark, and all the participants for having a very fruitful discussions. The framework has been very comprehensive, Mark. Yeah, on the doing the lessons learned recommendation. You give us from the strategy, until that we need to do the call for action for auditors. Yeah, the IIA asked to for all participants to have a group photo, so you can actually show up. Bapak dan Ibu boleh tolong mukanya supaya kita bisa dapat foto bersama before we end the sessions. So actually it has been a very enlightening, useful presentation for us all. Thank you very much, Mark, and everybody.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. And if anyone's got any questions, they want to sort of contact me, my contact details are on the last slide.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Well, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mark.
Thank you.
Jadi, yang foto.
Ya. First page. Oke, terus siapa nih, Nur? Second page sudah belum?
Ini baru second page.
Second page, oke, third page. Tolong dibuka semua. Kalau mau greeting ke Mark, dibuka semua. Thank you, Mark. Silakan.
Suruh nanya tiga, Bu.
Ya. Oke. Unmute semua. Oke. Sudah, Nur?
Sudah selesai, Pak.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Bu Resti. Thank you, Nur.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terima kasih Odi, terima
Bu
kasih Pak
Lesti,
Nur,
everyone.
terima kasih Bu Lesti. Sampai ketemu lagi.
We're looking forward for another webinar ya.
Okay.
Good and very inspiring.
Pak Nur, terima kasih Pak Nur Abdillah.
Yeah, thank you.
Ketemu.
So 3 o'clock in Sydney, Mark.
Yeah, it is 3
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock.
Afternoon.
You had your lunch already, or?
I haven't. No, I'm going to go do that now.
It's
I'm
late.
so sorry. Sorry.
No, no.
Your lunch is late.
Okay.
This has been great. Thank you.
Okay.
Looking forward to having you in person, Mark.
Definitely. I look forward to it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
When we're allowed to.
Let's see. November, September, probably. The vaccine is already here in Indonesia. We are testing it
Oh,
now.
okay.
Yeah, we got it from Sinovac.
Okay.
Yesterday. Yesterday. We are testing it.
Fantastic.
But to test need another 7 months, they said.
Yeah.
The testing. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank
you can leave.
you.
Yeah. So I'm leaving. Yeah. Thank you.